Jeff has a bachelor's and master's of science in civil engineering from Texas A&M and is a registered professional engineer in Texas and Missouri. He's worked for the San Antonio water system for the last 12 years in engineering, planning, and operations, and holds an A water operator license. And now he's going to tell us about the real-life experiences with the implementation of the groundwater rules. Jeff, tell it like it is.
All right, thank you very much, Mike. I'm very excited to come out here and talk to you all today, and I really appreciate you putting on this teleconference to tell all of us in the utility industry, all of us operators out there, really what this rule is all about. I'd also like to thank John and his team at TCEQ for working with us literally for the past 2 years to help us understand this rule. I hope most of y'all are still sitting out there. I'm sure most of you operators are probably sweating right now because of all the requirements of this new rule. And you haven't hit it off to an early happy hour. I'm sure you'll be headed there after this based upon all the requirements of this new rule. But let's try to get through this, and my objective right now is to try to put it together for a utility and understand the ramifications to the utilities. What we've been doing at San Antonio Water System basically since the beginning of the year, working with TCEQ, and really have been playing since January like the rule is in effect. So that's really my objective today, to try to put together what this really means to the guy out in the field, to the guy out there running the water system. Basically, we've went through all the groundwater rule requirements. We've talked today about comprehensive compliant investigations or sanitary sewer surveys, and we've talked about source water monitoring, and source water monitoring being triggered if a positive total coliform is taken in the system and the system does not achieve 4-log inactivation. We've talked about assessment monitoring, and assessment monitoring for wells without sanitary easements or construction data. We already do that in Texas if you do not have that information. Operational reporting will be required if 4-log inactivation is chosen as a treatment method. And this is a big change for us in the groundwater that predominantly have groundwater and have not operated a surface water plant before. We've never had operational reporting per se before. Next slide. What I wanted to do with this next slide is just really show you what the San Antonio water system, how our system is set up, and really help you understand how complicated this rule is to us. And you understand why we've been really, as operators and as a system, really looking into this rule seriously ever since we heard about its implementation coming up just, it seems, right around the corner in December of 2009. So it's just right here upon us, and we've been looking at it for 2 years, and this date has really snuck up on us. We have numerous pressure zones across San Antonio, and most of our water really comes from the Edwards Aquifer. Right now, for instance, I'll give you an example. Right now, max day is about 300 MGD for us, and annual average day is about 170 MGD. I imagine today we're probably pumping somewhere around 240 MGD. We get about 8 MGD of surface water, a little bit of water out of the Trinity Aquifer, but most of our water is Edwards water. So it's a karst aquifer. Trinity Aquifer is a karst aquifer as well. We also get some water from the Carrizo Aquifer, which is a sand aquifer, so not quite as susceptible to microbial contamination as the karst aquifers. Most of our water, as I said, comes from the Edwards Aquifer, which basically the productive zone of the Edwards basically extends from the southwest to the northeast. So we move water up into the higher pressure zones through booster stations, and we bleed it down into the lower pressure zones with PRVs. So you can see our system is very complicated. We collect about 330 bacterial total coliform samples a month at about 180 different sites. So one thing I want to point out while I have this slide up, so most of our water is coming from here. We can have a positive TCR sample up here in the distribution system. Then we've got to figure out what source it was from down here that provided that water to that location. So it's very complicated for us, and we've been looking at that quite a bit. I will say this, for the larger systems, many of you have hydraulic models, and that would be a great benefit if you have a very complicated system, because it really helps you understand where that water is coming from. But the only disadvantage, you've got to have a well-calibrated extended period model to really help you understand what the source was. We right now have turned in our trigger source monitoring plan to TCEQ, and we have not chosen to use the model. We've based it upon an evaluation of the system, which causes us to be a little bit more conservative because we have to assume more sources because we're not sure because we don't have a model that tells us exactly what source would have contributed to that location. Next slide, please. Source water sampling. What happens if you get a positive in the distribution system? And again, it's just a positive total. It's not a positive fecal. It's just a positive total. You're required to do source water sampling unless your system provides 4-log treatment inactivation and was in compliance during the event. I should point out that we have two types of wells in our system. We have wells that pump into a primary pump station and wells that have a ground storage and then use high service pumps to pump out into distribution. We have secondary wells that pump from just basically directly into distribution. And so those are the two types of wells we have in our system. At our primary pump stations where you have a lot of ground storage, as Jack mentioned earlier, pretty easy to obtain 4-log inactivation. At the secondary wells where we do not have any storage, almost impossible to obtain 4-log inactivation. So at our majority of our primaries, no problem achieving 4-log inactivation. Secondary pump stations, as I mentioned, almost impossible. They basically bump directly out of the distribution system, out of the well directly into the distribution system. So you have very little contact time. So really water sampling at those sites is really going to be necessary. We have five locations where we sample monthly to achieve compliance. And those sites, we do not have either information, appropriate sanitary easement or construction data for the wells. So those are sites that we already do source water monitoring at. What I wanted to do with this slide is really show you, okay, what happens if you do have 4-log and what happens if you don't have 4-log? And as you can see, and this is just one of our TCR sample sites out in our distribution system. As you can see, if we do not have 4-log, we have a lot of wells to sample. And keep in mind, within 24 hours, you're required to sample those wells. So you can see that's a rather intimidating list. With 4-log, it significantly reduces it and basically reduces it to just our secondary pump stations. So just the pump stations that have a well that pump directly into distribution without ground storage. Okay, so say you unluckily get a positive total coliform, which does happen. It happens to all of us in the utility business. Then you have to go out and collect the source sample. Well, what happens if you go back and collect your source sample and no presence of a fecal indicator organism? I like to say life is good. Then you move on and wipe that off your head and thank God I have no fecal indicator.